Something was coming. Nobody could see it. Nobody wanted to see it. The Ardennes forest was quiet, the Allied front lines were holding, and the generals in their warm headquarters were planning the next phase of an advance they believed was already unstoppable. But two men working in a stone building in Nancy, France, were quietly building a machine for a war nobody else had declared yet. The date was December 1944. The general was George S. Patton. The man beside him was Major General Hobart Gay. And the question that should stay with you for the rest of this story is this: how do two men prepare an answer before anyone has asked the question, and then execute it in a single phone call? Patton and Gay had been working together since North Africa in 1942. Through Tunisia, through Sicily, through the breakout across France, Gay had served as Patton's chief of staff, the man who took every bold instinct Patton possessed and translated it into orders that 130,000 soldiers could actually execute. Their partnership was not a friendship built on sentiment. It was a professional bond built on the understanding that one man's vision was only as powerful as the other man's ability to make it real. Patton saw the battlefield the way a chess player sees the board 6 moves ahead. Gay was the hand that moved the pieces. By late November 1944, Patton had noticed something that the broader Allied intelligence apparatus was choosing to ignore. The Ardennes forest stretching across Belgium and Luxembourg had been classified as a quiet sector. Two American corps were holding a front far too wide for their numbers, thinly spread across terrain that military doctrine said was unsuitable for a major armored offensive. Patton disagreed with that assessment. He told Gay privately that the situation there was a serious vulnerability. He believed the Germans were assembling east of that quiet front. He believed the quiet was not peace. He believed it was preparation. Gay listened, and then Gay acted. Without waiting for authorization from anyone above them in the chain of command, Patton and Gay began constructing contingency plans in November. 3 separate attack axes, all pointing north, all built around the possibility that Third Army might need to pivot rapidly from its current eastern drive and redirect its entire weight into an emergency relief operation. The plans were not official. They were not submitted for approval. They existed because two men trusted each other's judgment enough to do the work before the crisis demanded it. On the morning of December 16, 1944, 3 German armies moved out of the Ardennes forest and struck the American lines with a force that included over 200,000 troops and nearly 1,000 armored vehicles. The surprise was total. Within hours, entire American units were surrounded or in retreat. The Belgian crossroads town of Bastogne, whose 7 converging roads made it irreplaceable to any military force trying to move through the region, was directly in the path of the German advance. Patton received the news. He was not surprised. He turned to Gay, and the staff work they had already done together began to matter immediately. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley called Patton that evening. He showed him the maps. The German penetrations were deep and widening. Bradley asked what Third Army could do. Patton told him he could have 2 divisions moving north by the following morning and a third within 24 hours if needed. Bradley told him to report to Verdun the next day to meet with General Eisenhower and the senior Allied commanders. Patton hung up the phone and turned his attention back to Gay. There was work to do before that meeting. The morning of December 19th began with Patton and Gay in the same room in Nancy. Patton called a 7:30 staff meeting with his corps commanders. Major General Mantonetti of 12th Corps was present. Major General John Milliken of 3rd Corps was present. Gay stood at Patton's side. Patton addressed the room with the kind of clarity that Gay had come to recognize as the signal that something significant was about to be set in motion. He told them that Third Army had a chance to go down in history as the greatest army of that war. He told them they were going to attack the enemy on his exposed flank. He told them to be professional, not excited, and then he turned to the map. Patton drew 3 attack axes on the map. The first he called sent a deep northern thrust through Diekirch that would cut the German salient completely off at its base. This was the option Patton wanted personally. It was the boldest option, the most decisive, and the most dangerous. The second he called Nickel a direct drive from Ardennes toward Bastogne. 13 miles of frozen roads standing between the relief column and the surrounded defenders inside the town. The third he called Dime, a flexible attack against wherever the German advance ultimately stabilized. 3 plans, 3 possible futures. Patton wrote the code names on a piece of paper, folded it, and placed it in Gay's hand. The instruction Gay received was precise and carried the full weight of what their partnership had been built to do. Patton was about to drive 50 miles to Verdun and sit in a room with Eisenhower, Bradley, Tedder, Bedell Smith, and the senior Allied command. He would learn what the Supreme Commanders wanted Third Army to do, and then he would call Gay. One word. Gay would know which plan to execute. No lengthy orders, no staff debate, no second call for clarification. The entire complexity of pivoting an army of 130,000 men, 90 degrees in a winter blizzard, had already been resolved, and the resolution lived in Gay's hands on a folded piece of paper. Think carefully about what that arrangement actually required. Patton had to trust that Gay had built 3 fully functional battle plans, each one capable of moving an entire army at a moment's notice. Gay had to trust that Patton would extract the right decision from a room full of competing senior commanders and communicate it in a single word. Neither man could afford to be wrong. The 101st Airborne Division was already moving toward Bastogne in open trucks through freezing weather. The corridor to reach them was narrowing by the hour. If the plans were incomplete, or the call was misunderstood, or the machine failed to start, the consequences would reach far beyond a single battle. Patton left Nancy at 9:15 that morning with his Assistant Chief of Staff, Colonel Paul Harkins. Gay remained in Nancy. The distance between those two men at that moment, one in a car on a snow-covered road, one at a desk holding the blueprints of an army, captures the nature of their command relationship better than any formal description could. Patton projected the vision. Gay held the mechanism. Both were required. Neither was sufficient alone. The Verdun conference room was a heavy French stone barracks on a sea of mud. 16 senior Allied commanders filled a freezing second-floor room where a small coal stove did almost nothing against the cold. Everyone kept their overcoats on. Maps covered the wall. Eisenhower arrived looking grave. He opened by saying that the present situation was to be regarded as one of opportunity, not disaster, and that there would be only cheerful faces at the conference table. The smiles in the room were, by every account, forced. Patton responded immediately. He said that they should have the courage to let the enemy go all the way to Paris, cut them off, and destroy them there. The tension in the room broke briefly. Eisenhower stayed focused. He told the assembled commanders that the enemy must not cross the Meuse River. Then he turned to Patton and asked the question everyone in the room was waiting to hear answered. How long would it take Third Army to turn north and attack? Patton looked at Eisenhower and said he could attack the day after tomorrow morning. The room went quiet. Then, according to accounts preserved in historical records, the senior commanders responded with disbelief. Turning a full army 90 degrees in snow in 48 hours, with supply lines pointing the wrong direction, was considered by nearly every officer present to be physically impossible. Eisenhower told Patton to take 3 days rather than 2. He did not want a piecemeal attack that left the divisions exposed. Patton accepted the adjustment. Then came the first direct conflict of the meeting. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder, Eisenhower's British deputy, proposed that Patton transfer Walker's 22nd Corps to General Devers' 7th Army. Patton refused without hesitation. Walker's corps held the zone nearest to the German city of Trier, and Patton had calculated that Trier was the gateway to an entire German regional campaign he had been pursuing for months. He also needed 20 Corps as a rotation reserve for his attacking divisions. Eisenhower sided with Patton. Tedder did not press further, but the refusal was direct and unambiguous, and it revealed something important about how Patton operated even under maximum pressure from above. He protected the architecture he had built with Gay. He did not allow the meeting to dismantle it. The second conflict at Verdun was quieter, but carried equal strategic weight. It was the argument between Patton and Bradley about where exactly Third Army should direct its attack. Patton wanted CENT. He had wanted it since he drew the 3 axes on the map in Nancy that morning and handed the paper to Gay. CENT meant driving north through Diekirch and cutting the entire German salient off at its base, trapping the attacking armies before they could withdraw. It was the kind of operational move that could end an offensive rather than simply blunt it. Bradley disagreed. He argued that Nickel, the direct drive toward Bastogne, was the priority the situation demanded. The defenders inside that surrounded town needed a corridor open now, not a strategic encirclement they might not survive long enough to benefit from. Eisenhower made the final decision. Nickel, drive for Bastogne, strengthen the southern shoulder of the Allied line. Patton accepted the order, but those who were in the room understood his acceptance was not enthusiastic. He had said before the meeting that the people at Supreme Headquarters did not think the way he and Gay did. That assessment had just been confirmed. But the plans Gay was holding in Nancy were already built, and Nickel was one of them. The machine was ready. Patton needed only to give it the signal. Patton left the building at 9:15 that morning and made one phone call to Gay and Nancy. Some historical accounts record the activation phrase as play ball. 2 words. And with those 2 words, Gay set the machine in motion. Major General Hugh Gaffey's 4th Armored Division was redirected north toward Bastogne along the Arlon-Martelange Road. Major General Willard Paul's 26th Infantry Division was pointed toward Wiltz. Major General Horace McBride's 88th Infantry Division moved against Edelbrook. 1 regiment of the 5th Infantry Division attacked near Echterna. Walker's 20th Corps shifted to anchor the southern flank. Devers' 7th Army was contacted to cover the sector 3rd Army had just vacated. Gay managing the pivot from Nancy while Patton drove the front lines is the defining image of their partnership during the Bastogne operation. On December 20th alone, Patton personally visited 12 separate command posts in a single day, covering Corps headquarters, division command posts, and Army Group headquarters from one end of the front to the other. While Patton was doing that, Gay was the operational center of the entire 3rd Army. Every telephone call, every logistics coordination, every supply rerouting, every communication between the advancing divisions and the rear support structure, all of it ran through Gay. The historical record states directly that Patton coordinated by telephone with Gay and Nancy throughout December 20th as the 3rd Army staff worked behind the scenes. Here is the misconception that needs to be confronted directly. The popular account of the Bastogne relief centers on one image: Patton, his promise, his confidence in the Verdun room, his relentless drive. That image is not false, but it is incomplete in a way that changes the meaning of the entire operation. Military historian David T. Zabecki, in his study of this campaign, gave his work a subtitle that says precisely what the popular account omits. Excellent intelligence and superb staff work produced a feat of generalship even more amazing than the version most people know. The superb staff work was Gay's. The machine that responded to play ball did not build itself. Gay built it, piece by piece, across November and December, without announcement and without credit. The logistics of the pivot were enormous. Supply lines that had been pointing east for months were now required to point north. 3rd Army's quartermasters requested 50,000 yards of white material to make winter camouflage for soldiers crossing open snow-covered terrain. The supply system did not have it. They found 5,000 mattress covers instead, which were cut and distributed as 10,000 improvised white garments. 3 million gallons of fuel had been evacuated from forward positions during the 72-hour period following December 16th, fuel that would otherwise have been captured and used against the American advance. Gay coordinated every element of this from Nancy. The advance that reached Bastogne on December 26 was built on decisions Gay made in the hours after that single phone call. Consider what would have happened if Gay had not spent those November weeks quietly building the 3 plans without authorization. Turning 130,000 soldiers without pre-built operational orders would have required days of staff conferences, revised supply manifests, and command coordination that the calendar did not permit. The 101st Airborne Division inside Bastogne, surrounded since December 20th and running critically low on ammunition, food, and medical supplies, could not have survived an extended delay. The corridor into the town might have closed permanently before a single relief column reached it. Patton's promise at Verdun would have remained a promise. Gay's quiet work in November is what made it a fact. Inside Bastogne on December 22nd, German commanders delivered a formal written demand for surrender to Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. McAuliffe read it and replied with a single word: nuts. When the German truce party asked for clarification, an American officer told them it meant they should go to the other side. The defenders returned to their positions. They held because they knew, through communications with 3rd Army, that relief was coming. They did not know exactly when. But Gay's machine was already moving south of them. The advance of the 4th Armored Division toward Bastogne was not a clean charge. It was grinding, costly, and contested at every kilometer. Bridges were destroyed ahead of the columns. Roads were ice. German formations fought stubbornly across the corridor. Patton pushed his division commanders relentlessly, through direct visits and through the telephone communications he maintained with Gay throughout the operation. Patton understood that the delay was not just an operational problem. Men inside Bastogne were running out of time. Between Patton's pressure from above and Gay's logistics management from Nancy, the 4th Armored kept moving. On December 23rd, the weather over the Ardennes cleared. Allied fighter-bomber aircraft, grounded for days by low cloud cover, were finally able to fly close support missions over the advancing columns and the roads feeding the German offensive. The clearing came at the critical moment when the 4th Armored needed air cover for its final push. Patton had taken the unusual step of ordering 3rd Army chaplain Colonel James Hugh O'Neill to compose a prayer for clear skies, which was printed and distributed across the Army. Whether the weather changed because of atmospheric conditions or something else entirely, Patton awarded O'Neill a Bronze Star on the spot. The air support that followed was decisive. At 4:50 in the afternoon on December 26, 1944, a Sherman tank from Company C of the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, supported by the 53rd Armored Infantry, broke through the last German defensive line near the village of Eisenhower and made contact with Lieutenant Dwayne Webster of the 326th Engineers, 101st Airborne Division. The siege of Bastogne ended after 10 days of encirclement. Ground supply lines were fully reopened the following day. The 101st Airborne had suffered 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 missing between December 19th and January 6th. The corridor was open because Gay's machine had worked exactly as designed. Now resolve what has been waiting since the beginning of this story. Patton made the promise at Verdun. History recorded it. But Gay is the answer to the question of how the promise was kept. When Patton handed that folded paper to Gay and Nancy on the morning of December 19th, he was not just delegating logistics. He was placing the entire operational validity of his own reputation in Gay's hands. If the plans failed, if the machine did not start, if one division was out of position or one supply line was broken, the promise Patton made to Eisenhower in that freezing barracks room became nothing. Gay understood that weight, and Gay carried it without public acknowledgement, without a quote in any headline. After the Bastogne corridor opened, Patton and Gay continued operating as they always had. Patton pushed forward. Gay managed the structure behind him. 3rd Army moved through Germany, crossed the Rhine, and drove into Austria and Czechoslovakia before the war in Europe ended in May 1945. Throughout that final campaign, the same dynamic held. Patton in the field, Gay in the headquarters, 2 men functioning as a single command entity built on years of shared operational experience and an unspoken agreement about who did what and when. On December 9, 1945, with the war over and Patton preparing to return home, Gay organized a pheasant hunting trip near Mannheim, Germany. Both men got into the back seat of a 1938 Cadillac staff car. The driver headed toward the hunting area. A military truck made an unexpected turn ahead of them. Gay saw it coming. He said, "Sit tight," and braced for the impact. Patton did not see it. The collision was minor for everyone in the vehicle except Patton, who sustained severe spinal injuries. Gay sat beside him in the wreckage. Patton told Gay to rub his fingers. When Gay did, Patton told him to keep going. Those were among the last coherent field commands Patton ever gave, and they were given to the man who had been beside him through everything that mattered. Patton passed away on December 21, 1945. Gay went back to work. He deployed to Korea in 1950 and commanded the 1st Cavalry Division in combat. He proved, without Patton's name attached to his own, that he was a commander in his own right. History gave him a footnote, the folded piece of paper with 3 code names on it, and the phone call that set 130,000 men in motion across a Belgian winter, says otherwise. If you had been in that Verdun room on December 19, 1944, which plan would you have chosen? Patton's bold cut at the base of the German advance, or Bradley's direct relief of Bastogne? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.